Hello and welcome all to the winter session of Sea Conversations. I'm Dushyant Ashar and I teach at the School of Environment and Architecture. Sea Conversations are the school's engagement with the world that brings in discursive rigor as well as joy of connecting to new imaginations, voices, and ideas. This is the 18th cycle of Sea City Conversations, and this series is partly supported by Urban Center Mumbai. The winter series of Sea Conversations titled States of Matter has 6 talks from around the world. This series of talks are curated from the research interests of me and my colleague in the questions of materials, matter, and making of built forms and new phenomenologies of inhabitation. This series intends to open discussions and interrogations on the dialectical relationship between form, matter, technology, and phenomena, between the forest and the factory, the kitchen and the laboratory. Today is the 4th conversation titled Site Matter Gesture by Anne Holtrop. Anne has started this practice in 2009. Currently, the studios are based in Amsterdam and Muharraq in Bahrain. In 2015, the first 2 major buildings, Museum Fort Fekten and the National Pavilion of the Kingdom of Bahrain, were completed. Recently realized in the Customs House in Manama, operational as the main post office, and the Kesaria Sak and Green Corner building in Muharraq. The studio has completed new stores worldwide for Maison Margiela, with flagship stores in London, Paris, Osaka, and Shanghai, and is currently working on several UNESCO listed heritage sites in Muharraq. Murad Boutique Hotel and Siadi Pearl Museum in Riyadh, and MISK Art Institute. Anne is an associate professor at the ETH in Zurich. He has received many awards for his practice, the Charlotte Kohler Prize for Architecture by the Prince Bernhard Cultural Foundation in 2007, the Ayakov Chernikov International Prize in 2016, and the Aga Khan Award in 2019. The 2G monograph series dedicated its 73rd issue to Studio Anne Holtrop in 2016, and in 2020, a new monograph, Site Matter Gesture by L. Crocky, is published on the practice and its continuous research. The work of the studio, as well as the teaching and research outcomes, are presented and collected internationally in biennales and institutions. Recently, at the first Sharjah International Triennale, the Seoul Architecture Biennale, and Frac Le Plateau, and at the Carnegie Museum of Art. So welcome, Anne, and it's over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and hi to everyone that is tuning in. Let me share the screen. So oh wait, I need to press the play. Oh. Where is it? Here. Yeah, here we are. Yeah, this is working, right? So I prepared a talk for today to go through my practice, which I titled Site Matter Gesture, as my practice is a bit organized as a laboratory in which we experiment with the materiality of things, and where we explore materiality in all of its facets. So from where things are sourced to our ways of working in it, to construction, and that's where matter is added to both sides. So from sight and from the gestures that we link to it. And today I will show you a bit how these aspects, how they play a role and how we work with them in the practice. Yeah. But before that, I start with a short introduction on how my practice had started. I started actually not at all with materiality as its base for architecture, but I started with drawing. as I thought, the practice of the architect is mainly to draw. So we draw plans and we draw in that way the instructions for someone to make something. And I was interested in how this drawing, how actually we could manipulate this drawing and find through the means of the drawing other ways of forming an interpretation of form. So I looked at artists, you know, from John Cage to Jean Arp, and artists that were working, in my sense, with drawings that do not have a clear depiction of a clear reason or motivation to show something, but actually are first of all just form and you know, either pencil or ink on paper. And what I did with these drawings was that a bit like in this butterfly test by Hermann Rorschach, you know, this psychoanalyst, I started interpreting these drawings. What could they mean? How could I use them to produce an architecture with? And this for me was a very liberating process, because I didn't have to think myself so much as to establish a preconceived idea of what I want to make, but I could see it more as a process of engagement with things that would also surprise me to a large extent about what spatial possibilities and spatial arrangements could appear from these methods. So here, for instance, you see on the right a plan drawing of an apartment, a house, where literally I took the outline of such an inkblot, for instance, with all its quirks and its little forms, and I started, you know, planning how could you lay out a place within in such a form. And these then I would build, and mainly my work was in arts exhibitions and art institutions in museums shown. So my work was models, large-scale models, temporary spaces, etc. So here was a model of that same plan that you saw in the previous slides, built as a stacked tower. And for me, this appeal in this way was also that I could discover relationships within its interior, or relationships with its exterior, or the interstitial relationship between the things that were like understood by experimenting, by putting it forward. And also things that I thought, you know, in plan, maybe the house looked like a bit idiotic, or, you know, too crazy to be taken for real. But when the thing was made real, or could be understood more real through model or to temporary building, to my surprise, they were actually much more feasible and real than what I had imagined, which also learned me that often we are limiting on forehand ourselves in our imaginations, because we tend to do things that we have somehow knowledge of, and this knowledge is being put into question by perception, by seeing to perceive, and this to perceive things is not necessarily to have already a knowledge about something, but it's all about a certain experience, and that experience is first of all to know rather than to have on forehand knowledge. And this I found for me is a very it's a way of working, a way of looking at things, and it's very much still present in my work of understanding also how a creative process works and coming to certain findings or certain solutions for things. It's a very much a step-by-step process where you do not really define the end result, but you make responses on a previous step that you have taken. This is a project where that kind of method was used by taking the landscape drawing. So here you see the height lines of the site that was given to build a museum in the Netherlands for. I will not explain the project, but I will just show you the methods. So what I did was I used these height lines exactly. I traced them, I copied them, and I appropriated them in architecture. So here you see the two courtyards of a building that is built under the ground. These two spaces are open, but as you see, the lines exactly connect with, let's say, a height line, a drawing of annotating a landscape. And underneath, on the right side, what is built under the ground is the rectangular space that is tilted and connected to an existing old fortress. And within that rectangle, all the lines are lines that are captured from a landscape. So there is also no, let's say, initial rationality to things. It is an appropriation of form, in this case, something that comes from a natural landscape. It is not really nature because it's also man-made and then eroded, but it has a natural appearance, you could say. And that landscape, through the means of drawing, has been appropriated in architecture. And what happens with that was, in this case, that it also actually really follows its landscape. So here you see the boundary walls of the courtyard sticking out of the landscape, linking with the subtle heights of the landscape itself. I mean, subtle in the sense that in the Netherlands, we of course don't have really mountains and anything like this. So we have meter high differences, which maybe relate more directly to architecture. Here you see the courtyard in that project, which has a model, a very large scale model as a floor of a big part of the Dutch landscape with its rivers and dikes and polders and cities within it. But spatially, this building, as I said, these appropriation of form from the landscape resulted in all kind of different curvatures of walls that meander underground and through the windows have connections with these courtyards. And they feel a bit like, you know, when you have puzzle pieces and you look at the individual pieces, you know, there is a certain kind of logic and relationship to it, but they have also their own, you know, they feel really like fragments. That's maybe what I want to say. They feel not like an absolute whole. And I think that's something also that I like to look for, where things can be understood as an agglomeration of pieces that build up together a bigger thing. It's a very kind of, you know, atomic thinking of when we look at things around us, rather than there is absolute form as an overall absolute thing, which I never really wish for in the architecture. And here you see some more photos of that project. But what also happened with this project, and this was my first, let's say, full building project that I did in my own practice, was that when we had to build, or when we had to prepare for building, materiality really came in. It was with all of its physical presence, and here we see the building site at a certain state of that museum, and so that brought me also to realizations that, for instance, if we say we want to make a concrete building, which at that time was still a kind of, you know, maybe the holy grail of architecture, if you had made a concrete building. We actually do not define as much the concrete as we define as much the formwork to contain concrete as a fluid material before it sets and hardens. And we influence by large the properties of it through the reinforcement that is hidden within this concrete. And so I found it really interesting that actually we define we construct and we build fully a formwork, as you can see here on the right also, that has that you know, constrains and has an impact on matter from a fluid to a solid state. And that brings me to the first part of my sight, matter, gesture lecture, is that when we look around us, and here this is in Bahrain, where I live and have my main studio. Here you see the burial mounds on the left picture. This is 6,000-year-old work made by the Dilmun civilization to bury their ancestors. This is actually just material that is just around and brought onto a stack and a heap or a hill, as you could say, and that is just a rearrangement of matter that we just find on its site. On the right side is a more current example. This is the first photo I took when I arrived in Bahrain of one of the many land reclamations the country, the island state does. And again, here it is sand that is already on the sea bottom, put up onto a larger agglomeration of it to make land. And if you look at it, at this burial mounds, for instance, we have here in Bahrain endless fields. I think it's like 10,000 of these mounds. Some are bigger, some are smaller, some have little chambers inside built, but mostly of it is just the loose rock and the sand that is shuffled together on a heap, and in that way create a very specific meaning. It has significance now in its presence. And what I find really beautiful was that actually, from a material perspective, this was always there, but it is with our intervention as humans that we try to, you know, reconfigure something and it therefore creates meaning. And this I took over or I was already working on, let's say, I didn't took over back in time. I was already working on this in the Netherlands with the first project that was called Batara. And Batara was a response on the construction side of the museum that I showed you and in the start of the presentation. And it was about, you know, what other formworks could we imagine than the wooden or the steel formwork that we see in concrete construction. So I started working directly on the land, an empty vacant land, and I started digging and shoveling into this land, as you see here. And then I brought in a kind of lightweight fluid concrete, and we started just casting and pouring the cavities that has appeared by moving this sand around. And the result of that was when we excavated it, which we did all by ourselves, mainly in my studio. When we excavated it and we took it out of its place, you had something of one matter, the sand, the ground base in this case, that had informed the other matter. So there was a very clear imprint of the one in the other. And if you would analyze these pieces a bit more closely, you would see on the right side, you would see the loose sands, the compacted sands, traces of the digging tools. The relief, of course, had all left an imprint and an extremely rich form to look at, something that also maybe even, you know, gives a kind of image. You could imagine this is kind of rock or something that is taken out of the ground. Whereas the other side has very clearly the traces of a material that was fluid. So it is a kind of, you know, looks like frozen yogurt in a way, you know, something that has hardened in its pull. And then a third element of it is its perimeter. So the form is not rectangular anymore. The form has a very loose line that looks like the borderline of a coast or of a lake or something. So it has, and which of course are all very logical out of this process of casting, but there was like as if, you know, I haven't decided as much on these forms as they had appeared much more from a process of a certain way of an interaction of bringing a material in contact with that with another material. And then what we did in an architectural gesture, you could say, we have cut window of doors out of it, and we arranged these pieces together to make a kind of architecture with it that clearly shows, you know, kind of rooms and doors and of access. This we did in all kind of forms, from models to a kind of temporary structures, as you can see here. And then much later, and not so long ago from now on, it's in 2020, we built this, what we call the Green Corner building. It's a building that is the headquarters of an NGO here in Bahrain, the Sheikh Ibrahim Center, which is for the preservation of the cultural heritage in Bahrain. And the nice thing on this project was that it's part of a larger site that was at that moment unbuilt. So we could use and utilize that site for the construction of this building. And here you see, by the way, a few interior shots of that building. I will go now through the elements of it that you see. But for the concrete, we used that site very much in that way of Batara that I showed you. So we casted concrete directly on the soil, and the soil in Bahrain is sand based. So we casted directly on the sand of the sites, all the concrete elements that we needed for the walls, but also the floor slabs, and then afterwards placed them in the building. And after the cast, the soil actually just, the sand is loose, it disappears in the surface of the site again, and we can rearrange it and recast again. And a few things were really appealing of that method. One was that we hardly didn't need any formwork, so we had a significant reduction on the, you know, material usage and energy usage of construction. We also didn't have to move like prefab concrete. We didn't have to move and had a lot of transport. We just had to bring in the material, the concrete itself, and then everything else appeared from the site, and we just lifted it from one place to the other with a small crane. And here you see the drawings of it, where you see the floor slabs. The back wall is an in situ concrete that was needed for the building that was built behind it as a stabilization wall, and the rest of it is all done with this sand casting concrete. So the red are the floor slabs, and the blue here in the drawings are the wall elements. They're all load bearing, and that gave us also, of course, structural questions. So how can we calculate with elements of which we do not know the form exactly? Because we didn't, in this process, we didn't want to define form. So we just showed photos of models that we had made in the studio in gypsum, but we didn't really want to say, rather than the overall width and the overall height of an element, that was more or less given. So with the structural engineer, Mario Manotti, that we, as a Swiss engineer that teaches also at Accademia di Architettura in Mendrisio in Switzerland, we discussed a lot, okay, how can you work as an engineer with certain unpredictability, which is of course not what you want if you have to make structural calculations. So one of the solutions that we came up with, and there were several solutions needed, but I would say the most important solution was that we did not define its form, but we did define its mass. So we said, for instance, this element on the left is 8 tons, and the other one is 15 tons. So we define mass, and therefore we know somehow its total weight. We don't know exactly the weight distribution, but when we know the dead weight, we can already work with a lot of things when it comes to structural engineering. Another aspect of it was that because we didn't define form precisely, we really see, if we look at the facades, we see all the elements are unique in their form because all are just appeared from a cast on that site, a site that was arranged by the contractor itself. So we really see, in that sense, time and process visible in the facades that we read. You know, from the bottom where we started from, which actually is, as you can see here, also in the picture, if you can see my mouse circling around it, a very outspoken form, and later on you see forms that are maybe a bit more flat, etc. So you really have a timeline and process and change in that sense as really as a part of the expression or its main expression of the building. With the students, we in the ETH, where I'm teaching as a professor, we do similar things when it comes to our engagement with sites. Of course, not only casting on it. For instance, we went to Kyushu Island in the south of Japan, which is a volcanic island which has a lot of eruptions. It's a very active volcano, with Mount Aso-san as its main volcano. And here you see a map of, in the different colors, all the different eruptions that have happened over time. So here also we see a map that doesn't record one landscape, but records, it's more like a time document of a series of eruptions that have happened in time. And I think it's very beautiful to understand our surroundings, but also to understand our architecture as something of time and space, and that nothing has a permanent state or a stable state, but we are in a constant flux of change, and in that change we are taking part, and that change is forced upon us by nature, but it's also change that we, as in the way of in any work that we do, we are bringing in as well. I think, in a way, the idea of stability or permanence in any case is a very unnatural way of looking at things. So we have here, so we went, for instance, to this island with the students, and then we investigate the landscape, how the landscape has formed over time, how it's continuous to form, how human intervention, you know, morphs in a very specific way the grass fields, as you can see here on the photo, or the ones that we can witness the change a lot more strongly at the hot springs, which are constantly boiling and steaming, but also with its mineral deposits that color the water very strongly from red to kind of turquoise blues. But also how we can use this landscape from you see the students looking in a pit of a very iron-rich soil that is used as a fertilizer, or on the left you see sulfur making, where the sulfur appears on the top of the soil. Of course, we have crazy rock formations that have been pushed out of the earth in certain intense moments of eruptions, or we see here a professor explaining in what is the chemistry of things and why something looks yellow or red or blue, etc. Then we, of course, you have also our maybe daily benefits or interactions with such a landscape. So here you see steam cooking, a steam kitchen, old kitchen, where you see a crazy amount of mineral deposits on the hot water tank that is fed by the spring water from the ground, and that has been used as an energy source to cook with. And on the other side, you see volcanists that are monitoring and doing research how to monitor this and how to live in the best way in cohabitation with a landscape that, of course, is also threatening for us as humans. And then the last thing that I want to mention is to complete a kind of pluriformity of understanding of place is how we are in relationship in a spiritual or in a religious way, where you see here monks procession, worshipping certain holy rocks or holy mountains, in which belief is that there are gods reside, but it builds up a whole way of living and interacting with such a specific place. And what the students then do at the university is to work with this, for instance, in this case, with this phenomena of a volcanic landscape, and how that could inform an architecture, and how architecture can relate to it and is built upon all of these changes and sources that they see. That about sites. Now, matter and gesture, let's say. And matter and gesture really relates to, you know, how we alter material through craftsmanship or other specialisms, specialized industries, and how we process matter. We did a research that started in 2018 on aluminium. One moment, please. So we did a research in the aluminium production in Bahrain, because Bahrain had started an aluminium smelter, and it's one of the largest single-line smelters in the world, which is quite significant for such a small island. Already in the 60s, to diversify the economy, not only reliant on oil. And of course, Bahrain doesn't have the raw material, bauxite, but has all kind of different energy sources in which they could make aluminium. And since that presence, you see aluminium, and that's what we did. We followed actually the trail of aluminium in what it all ends up in. And you see here an old man working with aluminium sheet, making all kind of boxes or kitchens or anything for households with it, rather than wood, which is a very rare material in Bahrain. Or you see it in the current urbanization and building production, where aluminium is used from doors, windows, facades, etc. And we wanted to bring another aspect of the state of aluminium to Bahrain, where we do not use ready-made profiles or ready-made sheets, which are kind of, you know, you could say pre-formatted by the industry how to use them, but we wanted to bring the material state of it itself. So we had a very simple approach. We said, why don't we cast the aluminium, why don't we pour it directly also into the sand, like what we were doing for the concrete. And in that sense, we have it in another material present in this building, because we needed it for the doors and window shutters for the building, to make the building function. That was a lot more complicated than was said, because first of all, a metal casting, any metal casting, is a hollow cast rather than a solid cast. Simply, if you would cast this material solidly in a form, due to the high temperature differences, because aluminium is already almost 800 degrees Celsius, it would crazily crack and shrink in such a mass. Secondly, it would of course be an enormous amount of material that is actually not needed for its performance. So here you see, by the way, you saw the entrance door of the building. So in this hollow cast, you would have a very interesting other aspect. You will not have only the imprint of the sand in one form, but you also have the hollowing out, and you have a kind of negative interior that then we used also in the building. And you see the entrance door handle of the door, that you kind of, go with your hand in a kind of negative space, an interior space of something, and open the door in that way. With the foundry, we developed these casting techniques with an aluminium, which I think in total took us around 2 years to be able to develop it. But I show you a few aspects of it. This is in a way what you see here, the total complexity of the different kind of molds that you need to be able to produce the casting molds. And one of these is started very simple. So we see here the sand that we just was, the loose sand that was just digged as was done for the concrete. Then silicon is brushed on it of around 1 centimeter thickness. And silicon is a very, very flexible material, but the beauty of it, it hardly doesn't stick to anything. So also not to the sand. And it can record with a very high detail any other material. So therefore, it's a beautiful material for mold making. And with that and a support mold in a gypsum, you can produce the casting molds. And the casting molds you see here in green that are is actually just sand, which is very beautiful in the sense of the narrative of how this project started. It's a sand mold that is held together by little glue that colors the sand green, just to hold it together. In that, then a cast is made and the mold is completely broken and the cast is taken out. This is the sand casting technique and is one of the main casting techniques for any metal. And then what results of it is that we have casted aluminium in it in an irregular form, and therefore on different parts, different colorations of the material appear, things that have burned a bit more, things that have cooled down faster, etc. So it gives all this beautiful different hues of silverish color that are present. It is untreated, nothing has been done afterwards with it. This is just directly cleaned, but that's all out of the formwork. Another project that we do because we don't do only sand casting techniques is for Mesa Margiela, as was mentioned in the introduction, for which we defined the new store concept. We did I think we did like 6 of their stores ourselves, and now they roll out worldwide this concept further with their in-house team. But one of the things that we wanted to define was an architectural element, because as a store is already within an existing space, it is not so much up to us as architects to define its space again, but it's much more a question of interior. And we thought we needed something more of an architectural presence, and therefore we started defining column elements, as you can see here, and wall elements that we could use as to differentiate spaces within the overall space. And this technique of making these columns and walls came from a deep interest and analysis of John Galliano's work, who is the creative director of that brand, Margiela. And here you see a trench coat where he only used the lining of a coat as its main material to make the coat with. And that gave us the idea of maybe just literally work with textile in our work. So we started stitching textile molds, as you see here, the molds of a column with also some kind of constraints put on it, or you see the molds in textile for walls, as you can see here. And the nice thing, of course, with textile is that it is not a rigid material, but it's a material that forms, and when you put the weight of it, of the gypsum by the cast in it, it deforms and sets against the constraints that you put on it. And you see a result in the models one of the walls. And if you go close upon it, you see, because the textile is afterwards removed after it is uncasted, you see the imprint of textile on it as well. That then of course, was done in models, has to be translated into a one-to-one situation for stores. So we worked with a gypsum artisanal workshop in the north of Italy, where we have restarted with them how this textile casting could be appropriated. And it was also very beautiful as the gypsum making is a very simple in its infrastructure, because actually you just have the gypsum that you mix with water, can be applied with the hands, and has a bit of natural fibers or some steel profiles sometimes for reinforcement, and that's it. That's all what you need to have. And here you see the production of these walls and the textile that is ripped off to give it this imprint. And here you see some details of how it is placed in the store, or some larger details of the columns. And also in this case, again, due to the flexibility of textile, every column is slightly different, or every wall is slightly different. And then, of course, it is also a series of walls placed at different places within a space, or something that we also had made as the constraints that gives a kind of formal form, the thing that informs the form, let's say, of wall or of column. Then I come to the last part of my lecture today, where I want to talk about how these things all come together and work in a bigger perspective from sight, matter, and gesture. But I want to start that one with a quote by Michael Heitzer, which is a landscape artist, although he would of course deny that landscape art is his thing. But landscape artists in the 60s, like Michael Heitzer, but also Robert Smithson and alike, they wanted to explore art outside of the institute, so outside of the gallery space, or outside of the museums. And they started making interactions within the landscape. And one of the most famous works out of that is the Spiral Jetty by Robert Smithson, that you probably have seen photos of. But he says in this quote, and I jump directly to the second sentence, he said, "When I bought property in Nevada, I bought it because I had done studies and found sands and gravels that could make concrete, and clay soils that could be used for soil cements and running water. These were all raw materials. If you bought an acre of land in that part of the world, you were buying all the material you could use in a lifetime." And I thought it's a very beautifully said, and it's also what I try to show with these few historical photos of the burial mound in Bahrain, is that, the material is anywhere in the world in a way present. We live on a huge material reservoir. And that material, we can dig it, we can mine it, we can just take it, scrape it directly from the ground. And if it is within our intelligence, how can we refine these materials? How can we process these materials? Or how can we put these in contact with each other to make something else out of it? And Michael Heitzer really lived up to that belief. So he bought this land in Nevada, in which he worked, I think, for now more than 20 years on building his complex 1, 2, and I think he's up to number 4 now. Very large spatial constructions that have the size of architecture, or even bigger than that, in this desert, all run or mostly run by the material presence that is there on his land. And another example that I wanted to show you is this one. This is an obelisk by the cut by the ancient Egyptians in Aswan in the south of Egypt, but this one is unfinished. The theory is that it had cracked, or it had cracks while excavating it, and therefore became unusable. But you clearly see what the start of the work was, is that you have actually this bed of rock, and that one gigantic piece of stone was cut, liberated out of this rock, and forming one piece and one obelisk that then, with a lot of intelligence, was moved out of it, and then at its final place erected. It is incredible to believe that they were able to move such big pieces of stone. But what I find really beautiful is that, again, all the material is there in its presence of this site, and that it is by the gestures of Hune, in this case, to liberate a certain amount of rock to make a work with. We are at the moment have on a start of construction of an art institute that we are making in Saudi Arabia, in its capital in Riyadh, a project that we had started in 2018. A project that first of all starts with an excavation within the escarpment of a wadi, and wadi is a dry river bed. And within that excavation, the art institute itself, as a glass building, is freely placed and freestanding within it. Here you see a photo of that wadi. That wadi is a protected green site. It can flood in certain kind of rain seasons, so it needs to always stay free from building, but also for the reason that it is a protected green area. But in the escarpment, this building is the only building that can be placed within it. And we started with this kind of models where we in clay rebuilt a part of this wadi, and we started cutting it out, so that the first act is actually an excavation to create space, and to create a very specific space within that limestone rock landscape. And within that, a new rock or a new building is placed that then has a dialogue, is put in a dialogue within that excavated space. Here you see photos of the construction that is ongoing of that excavation within that rock. And what is also really beautiful is when you cut through the rock, you really start seeing the stratification of it. And in that sense, also, again, a time document that goes back in time that you can read along its excavation. And the depth is around 25-30 meters from the top. And then we developed a building material for that art institute, and the client once instructed us that they want a daylight museum. So we thought, okay, maybe the main material should be glass. So we developed a glass, again, with this idea of what we did also with the aluminium cast. So a glass that has a relief that very much looks like the relief of this limestone rock landscapes that we see in Saudi Arabia and around Riyadh. And you see here our first test where we were vacuum forming PET as a kind of flexible plastic over this kind of reliefs. That then later on became the idea of casted glass, and casted glass then again is a solid material, and therefore has also very much of a structural capacity, so we can actually stack and build with it to produce its facade with. True to the imprint on that landscape, you will have you will not have glass for viewing. So it's not a glass to look out through, but it is a glass to filter and diffuse light, and in that sense bring light in a very specific way as a condition in all the exhibition spaces. And since it is not a ceiling, but it is the facade, the walls of a museum space, light travels throughout the space, throughout the day, and marks really sites or its location as a very specific element in how light or light actually indicates that specific relationship with the place. Here you see some of the models where you see these glass facades with its diffused lights and the exhibition space. And there's no columns on the facade, so it is only a two-core structure that holds very large cantilevering floor slabs on which the glass, casted glass facades are put. As I said, this building stands within in that excavation, so it partly sticks out into the wadi, and most of the part is placed within that excavation. And its rooftop is exactly the same height as the urban landscape on top of that escarpment. So it is when you arrive from the city, you don't see any building. The building is sunken within the ground, you could say, and therefore the rooftop is on the same as the street level, so it's an accessible public square that continues over its roof. Here you see some of the model studies with this casted glass and its construction. It's a size of casted glass that hasn't been done in the world. We have found out by our interaction with all glass producers throughout the world, but at the moment are being produced for a mock-up phase to make. And as I said, that building doesn't have any column structure, so it only has a few cores that then also give space to the needed infrastructures, or shafts, or fire escape stairs, or elevators, or toilets, and the rest is just one open space that has these glass walls as its boundary, and it's bathing in that light. Here you see the section of how that space, how that building stands within its excavated rock. Another photo, another render of this. And so you have this kind of in-between space as an important element of the building as well. So you have this excavated rock, you have this glass facade, its dialogue in its relief, let's say how the one and the other have informed each other, and a very pleasant shaded space, which is much needed in this hot temperatures here, as a kind of outdoor space that relates to the building. And this is what I said about that, how the light, the sun travels through a building and leaves its, it makes its presence and its direction, but also when it leads actually the wadi walls, the excavation walls, and colors in a way the lights, how that all makes its presence in the building. And as I said, this glass is a casted glass. Most of our glass is a glass that is float glass, so that is into sheets of maximum 2 centimeters, I think, available worldwide, and the standard dimensions are 3 by 6 meters. This is what we build most of our things with when it comes to the use of glass in architecture. But casted glass gives us the possibility to have its fluid base and cast it in any form, theoretically in any form that we want to form it in. And here you see how that is poured in a steel mold on the right picture. And this mass, the making of glass, you need a lot of heat. So the glass has a heat of 1600 degrees Celsius. And then can even be modeled upon. So this is, for instance, a stamping technique where you have a mass of glass that is holds itself together, but can be still altered in its surface and be pressed, for instance, by steel stamps can be pressed form into. And you see one of the tests of the glass with its irregular relief. And then that glass mass is put in an annealing oven because glass from this very hot state to an environment temperature of, let's say, 25 degrees Celsius needs to be cooled down very slowly. Otherwise, it would directly crack and break. And the thicker the glass mass is, the longer this, what they call the annealing process has to take place. So if we have our glass with a thickness of an average of 10 centimeters, it will need to be 3 to 4 weeks in an oven. And that oven is a traveling oven, so it gets into one side and then it travels slowly towards the other side. This oven can be 100 meters long or 150 meters long, where it cools down in and to the environment temperatures. This process, as I said, is called annealing. And that's, of course, why we do not have very thick pieces of glass standard in the market, because that would be too time consuming just simply to produce. And that's why our glass is 2 centimeters thick maximum. And then we start laminating glass if we need thicker glass for its usage. That's what we see as a standard in the glass. Another way of forming this glass in irregular ways is a technique that is called slumping. So we actually take a standard piece of glass and then we bring it in an oven and we bring a temperature up to only half of the temperature, so like 800 degrees Celsius, in which this glass starts to become elastic, and then by gravity and the imprint of the formwork from below, it forms in its shape of the molds, and then you can also get this kind of glass. But then, of course, both sides are formed, whereas casted glass has a flat side and a relief side. Here you see this test that we did with the slumping of glass. And that then is the, here you see some models of where we put that in a building. Yeah, that's the end of my talk. I think I will stop sharing my screen. Oh. Yeah.
Yep.
Here we are. Yes.
Oh, great. And thanks a lot. I mean, that was quite a lot of things to grasp, and also I think it was good to see all these projects together with the narrative that you kind of have about the site and material and gesture. And I was also quite intrigued with the way in which you entered from, like, through a process that we kind of go through as architects of drawing and then trying to kind of conceive a building through a certain set process, and from that to kind of, the material sort of taking over and becoming, in sense, a method to sort of draw again. Now, like drawing from, you can say, landscapes, and drawing from the materials that are around us, or maybe the drawing from the processes that go around, which we generally sort of ignore by terming them as temporary, or terming them as, that they just kind of come and go. And you spoke of, the stability and the permanence, which is sort of very unnatural in that sense. So I mean, I'm just kind of linking those aspects and trying to see, what process sort of emerges from this in the sense that your material experiments sort of take out, and also the relationship that kind of came out very strongly is the whole. I mean, there are a series of experiments that you do by casting, and drawing in that sense is a very sort of informed gesture. And I'm thinking of and that also kind of made me think of what would be the sort of logic to kind of make a cast, because in an absolute form, say when we cast a building which has a column, a beam, so the absoluteness of those cuboids, or you can say there are very clear forms that we sort of cast. But what would be the logic of this? And I'm kind of placing it within the context of drawing, from where you sort of traverse to this and kind of go back. So I think that'll be quite interesting to open up to start with, and then there are two more following the ideas that I would want to open up later. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me the similarity, the relationship between the drawing, in the way how I use this drawing in this kind of automated drawing sense, you know, a drawing that refuses to depict something, and the way how we work with materiality is that it is very much something that is process based, first of all. So it doesn't really, it refuses to fix end results. No. And that is of course when it comes to architecture and building, not something that you can hold on to forever, because we need to define things and we need to finalize the way how we construct things. But I think in our engagement and in the process in how we are able to develop this, we try to stretch as long as possible that process aspect. So that means in our own part of making a design, but also in the way when something gets constructed, that it really is a process where all the steps have to be invented, no, and have to be answered. Yeah, are answers to a step that was taken before that, you know. So we say we casting glass, okay, no, etc., etc. So it builds up on all these steps, you know. And okay, what type of glass, what kind of casting methods, what kind of sizes, what can we understand of the structural aspects of it, what can we understand of how light performs through it, how can we answer? So and with all these questions, it involves because it's not only our own trajectory, it involves all the other people that are involved in this, you know, and adds bits and pieces to this. So we work with a whole bunch of engineers, but also in this last project with geologists, no, and to understand what can we do. And what I really try in the practice is to maybe we set a direction, but the direction is really to be explored, no, and to be defined and set. And that the drawing maybe was more a drawing to explore the making of space, no, in no matter what material that then appears, but just the definition of space. And I transited to where space is defined through its materiality, no, and informed by its materiality. Because also the way how the glass, I didn't explain that now in the lecture, but how the glass is stacked, that it is not stacked on top of each other, but that it is this overlapping structure, makes a very, very specific spatial formation also, you know, because one wall is kind of going like this, or one wall is going like that, the excavation wall is straight. So you have all this kind of converging spaces, and also in floor plan, this is the same thing. That has to do with the fact how to work with the tolerances, how to get structural logic out of, you know, how one panel make more panels out of it, etc. So these things I do not really have in my mind, as they are consequential in a way, you know, and that I find really interesting to work in such a way, because then it leaves also openness to this definition of what is the final architecture of it. Yeah.
No, and also I think this this brings me to a question that even I am trying to sort of explore, the question of precision. And I think that the relationship of form to precision, especially in the cultural center that we saw, and I was quite interested in the way that the engineers approached it, and I think it kind of directed the whole, you can say, the structural system of it being load bearing. That is one, and 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 this kind of really struck me. You don't define the form, but you define mass, and I think in that. And later, when you sort of cut the panels to sort of open doors, have windows, or organize them in a certain configuration, I was just thinking, what is the sense of precision when one is kind of thinking through these processes? It also comes from the earlier examples of the earlier experiments that you made in Batara, where the perimeter is uninformed by an absolute sort of geometry, or and also kind of prepares a certain raw material, so to say, like these castings, that they become a raw materials to sort of work again through this process. And I think we are trying to, I don't know if it would be okay to sort of call it kind of, we are trying to refine, say, what precision really means through these processes, because all of these experiments, or all of these materials, are not formed through the industrial production of all of these assembled parts.
Yeah.
So saying that, I think the other continuation of the drawing and the sort of ecosystem that one really opens up, that you just kind of mentioned, there's a whole melting of this disciplinary dominance, or you can say specificities, that architecture sort of work across, I think, the last whatever 100 years. It's kind of changing, and through this opening up of understanding materiality through not just what you make through industrial processes, but also energy sources, or say material resource through these very temporal conditions that probably you visited in Japan, and how it informed, say, the architecture or the phenomena that kind of becomes an integral part, or we can say kind of integrated into the material or materiality of the built form. So I think I was kind of drawing these many relationships, and I think the question of the precision, also, like, how you worked out the walls of the cultural center, where, I mean, I thought that was quite interesting. I mean, I just want to know a little bit more, and I think I do open up the question of precision across all of these projects, which was across all of the detailings, even the one that you mentioned last, with the glass being shifted a little bit. Our senses and perception of precision are kind of shifting.
Yes, I think, I mean, a precision is, of course, precision in the sense also of control, is very much part of it. It's not a process where we just free form and play and just throw something around and that's it. So it is very much about also about control in that sense. But I think what is a kind of leading in it is that I do not wish to say I want to achieve this or that exactly, but I very much want to, question in a way the materiality in how, what it wants to be, in a way, how it wants to be formed, and learn from that by interacting with it, and in that sense get more control and more precision from that experience. So I arrive not with this, what I tried to explain in the beginning, with a set of knowledge and say, stone has to be cut in such and such a way, and I will tell you, because I have 30 years of experience of stone cutting, and we cut stone like this, so that's not my approach. I want to approach it with the questions, in mind, with that I want to question the situation, and because I think that's the only way how I can lead to an unexpected outcome, because the other one would inform me with a very preconditions idea of what the outcome should be. So that leaves a lot less openness in that sense. So that's why I would always opt for the other way of approaching it. And it's also very nice to ask the questions, or to try to understand what are the questions that we are facing with, rather than already arrive with the answers that you know about something, you know. So that's I do that with the students as well. But yeah, when we are asking these questions and things, we want to, of course, also gain control on something that we are at definition of, you know. And the more steps we take, also the harder it is to take another step, you know. So at a certain moment, you reach an end, you know, you can't continue anymore. And the end is only defined by budget or time or anything. This is also defined by the fact that this process just gives you, you know, there is no other step anymore to alter it. So then we reach a final state. And most of the time, that, of course, hopefully that is at the best when it coincides with that a building gets built and finished, you know, like that. But that's not also always the case. So we also can, you know, it can result in that it just doesn't, you know, it's trends already before, we cannot continue to, and we need to, you know, we need to abort it, or etc. So
And just sort of pushing that question a little further, there's also a certain relationship that we kind of have in terms of how, by making by hand, like all of these processes involve many methods of making. Like you have a process where it's cast by hand, some parts are being made in a factory, or some through another means. So or maybe in a lab. And I think you also spoke of practice as a laboratory. And here I think kind of, is it kind of what is the refreshed mode in which we are sort of operating right now, with all of these many ways to sort of make things? It's not going back to this, you know, we have lost traditions and we are going back to, you know, sculpting it, or, you know, making by hand and stitch. I think the whole like the science has become one way to sort of enter this. And I think our intuition has more much more informed, I would say. It's kind of much more kind of prepared by the knowledge of science that we kind of currently hold collectively, not even as an individual architect, but I think with all of the other disciplines or specialists that say are involved in processes that make these buildings. So so that's something that I was also interested in. How does it kind of refresh this whole ecosystem, and what kind of say and here I would like to also bring in, say, some of the connections that are there to the pedagogic exercises that you have done at ETH, where I think these many processes sort of open up the entry of phenomena through more intensive method. So I just want to sort of continue that, and then kind of take it to maybe the later part. It might be nice to sort of look at the current you can say influence of digital fabrication, which is in a way, it's kind of, it comes through a way of drawing, and it's kind of scripting a drawing, or scripting a system, so as to kind of scripting a process in this whole ecosystem of making by hand. So I'm just trying to sort of look at and draw parallels across these many you know, ways of making, and kind of, you know, locating intuition here through science, and rather than, you know, the logics of scripting, or the way you said that, you know, we know what we are doing. It's not that we're kind of exploring.
I think let's say, first of all, we we really, within the how we work in the practice, we are not nostalgic at all. No, we are really working with the tools and the methods that we have now to our disposal. So that has to do with the fabrication of things. For instance, this cast glass. I mean, I could give a lecture of a whole hour just on how to produce this glass, which we really used innovations in the glass industry, very recent innovations to be able, for instance, to do lamination in such a glass paneling, which we need for safety, because at the end there will always be a possibility of thermal breakage when such a panel is in a building. So we need to glue another glass on top of it, so to hold it together in case that would happen. But since we have irregular surfaces, and also the pouring surface which looks flat is not flat, and therefore you cannot just laminate it in any more conventional lamination processes, etc. So we work a lot with how are the innovations, how can we use them, but also in our own way. You know, we are not shy of 3D scanning and 3D modeling and etc. So the one thing, the material forming and informs the other thing. So they go back and forward. They live in the computer, these things, as they live as prototypes and tests at the same time. And this is a back and forward process. So that really helps us. I mean, I find a great example also the work of Frank Gehry, where you know it was key to his development of the architecture was that he could have a software programming in 3D to be able to control, and then again we are about control, this process of paper forming in models and things like that, how that to bring into an engineering reality in the computer that we can calculate and draw and study, etc. So that's what we do, and we live in an easier time than when Frank Gehry started, because we already have these things so much more to our disposal. They're so much more integrated. Now, when it comes to digital fabrication, where we see that we want, let's say, robotics to execute certain things for us, and we need to give instructions to the robot what it needs to do. And I don't really have a very specific opinion about it, other than I think that the robots are most of the time doing one gesture only, So they are set to, even if the robot would consist of an arm and a hand, and it would grab mud and it would throw mud in a certain spots, and we can, how random we want to script the algorithms that, define the throwings and the spots, it still is that what this robot is doing is throwing that piece of mud, because that's what it is engineered for, and that, I think, where we are, when we make as humans things, there's so many more things that go through our relationship with something, and we can use an endless amount of tools that help us to do these things, industrial tools, production, whatever we have. But that brain power is part of the process of the direct interaction with these things in a way still, no? When we cast glass, it's the one that opens the oven, he looks at it, he almost sniffs it to understand where we are, How many computers we have to control the temperatures and things, So I find, there is a human intelligence still also there that's very much part of it. So I would not think that one can take over, for instance, craftsmanship, there's things. So I think when it comes to digital fabrication, which could be fine, but where we also still need craftsmanship, at the same time, So So we need to look in these things I would think in a hybrid way, not one that replaces another, or we will not just to say that humans will not need to be part of things anymore. I think it has the way our way of relating to things is very it's very rich, and that is also part of it. Yeah.
Also, I think just maybe I know there's one question waiting, but I'll come to it in a moment. So, thinking of all of these methods and processes, I think there's a certain uncertainty that while we are actually experimenting or making casts, there's a whole a sense of phenomenology that each material starts to sort of inform or bring in with the way in which it is either, like, for example, the sand, the texture of the sand, kind of informing the texture of the solid block of concrete, or the glass being cast with those sort of materials embedded partly within, or kind of controlling the light to its thicknesses, and the textures of the glass wall and the texture of the stone kind of speaking to each other. And so I think how does one sort of locate the phenomena and the production of this phenomena through this process? Because I think at a certain moment of time we are just kind of going with this whole charge of experimenting things, but then there are things that one finds on the way. So how does what does become the element to kind of generate phenomena, or where does this kind of phenomena lie when one is really because it came through, say, a single panel, and what that could produce, say in the case of glass, the formed glass, or maybe the cast aluminum and the cast the concrete panel. So does it kind of emerge there as a small say, I would call it the material gesture that experiment produced, and from there the phenomena of the configured space is kind of thought of, or is it like for example, a more homogeneous or more larger sense of phenomena from which, say, these smaller experiments sort of come out?
No, I think it is a kind of it's a back and forward between things. So no, it's not the one to start with, and then it's a kind of process to lead to the other. No, it's I think I work very much in the back and forward of these things, so we can do this in small, but what does it imply at large? No, and that's very much there. But a building is always a thing of a lot of bits and pieces. A building is never one thing. And that even if it might give you the impression of such a thing, it's all constructed out of small bits and pieces at the end of the day. So I like to look also, I like to understand that in that kind of way, that I need to invent what are the bits and pieces. But also I like architecture that is not an absolute whole, but I like architecture that also expresses this kind of elements, you could say. So for me, a building is a bit like chemistry, or like atoms, so we have, it's not one atom, but we have all the atoms that we need to put in relationship with each other, and in their specific relationship, they get very specific characteristics. And that's what I like to express. So that is the spatial conditions it's set out. These are the way how something is built up out of parts, etc. So that for me is important. And even in the, let's say, in the drawing series, the drawing is never never at a place the same as somewhere else. It's constantly, okay, it's a variation of something, but it's constantly changing its specific form, and therefore, and that gives a richness of form, but also gives a richness of understanding things. And this is how I like to, I like that there is a certain complexity, and that can be an underlying complexity, because at first it might appear simple, or might appear clear in front of us, but then there is actually a lot of complexity. I went last week for the first time to the Taj Mahal. I have visited India many times, but I've always refused, it seems, the most important things, or the most important monument. So I did that now last week, and I was like incredibly impressed by the Taj Mahal, by its material presence, and how that creates also this kind of complexity in it. So we have this understanding of this pure white building that stands there, but the reality, of course, is that it is this kind of very rich, very different types of white marbles, bits and pieces that we see together, that build up this impression of one white building, but is on closer expectations incredibly rich in its definition. And I thought, and it's that material presence, of course. I mean, we can talk about all the other things of if it's symmetry and its craftsmanship and it's the way how the spaces are defined, etc. But I found that aspect really, that made such an impression on me. And that I thought, that is, if that building would be a white painted plaster building, would not at all convey the same kind of intensity, And it's not because marble is a precious material. No, it is that it is such a rich, natural material that gives you all these different little differences, understanding of it, that is there.
So and also I think with this with the way you mentioned of the smell of the heat that the glass kind of produce, and that's how you know if it's baked or not. And I think we do the same with the cakes in our oven, or maybe the bricks in a kiln, and I'm sure if you have visited India, I think you might have seen a lot of these the descriptions of how things happen, and they're quite intuitive. And I was just kind of trying to open up this whole sense of intuition built from science. And I think the way in which I think we read the buildings now, or maybe the building materials, is through that those senses. And I think the phenomena of Taj Mahal that you spoke of, it's also to do with the incidental light that falls into the material, that kind of makes it either translucent or maybe kind of reflect at certain moment. So I think we are all in that sense sort of observing and kind of getting into the more finer senses or matter senses of material. So I just want to now maybe open up. There's a question waiting. We'll take Joel. Can we ask Dhruv to join?
He's here, Dusha.
I'm here.
Go ahead. Dhruv, go ahead for your question.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
So I just wanted really amazing presentation and really loved the work. So I just wanted to know how for every different project, every different structure, the process changes, and that's really different from a process which we follow in our works, which is very definite. And how do you redefine this project for a process for every structure or every build form you build? And all. One more thing I was interested in was one of the project was where it was an NGO where you build the structure for the NGO. There was a boundary wall made. Can you talk about it a little bit if that was a part of it, and how does the process and the material is thought about in the start through the drawings from the site itself? Like how does the site comes in and helps us to make the drawings and define the process and the material?
Mhm. I think, I mean, to answer the first question is, it's also the reason why I don't do many projects at the same time, or many projects after each other, is that for me, the real enjoyment is to keep searching within the work, you know, so that's that is the real joy. It's of course the pain, it's also a painful process, but it really is a process that keeps me alive and keeps me connected to what we do. So I just need it. Like if I would do the same thing again, I would be I would be bored to death already from the start. You know, I would think, you know, I would be bored of myself. Even if I give a lecture, too often I give lecture about my work, I feels like I'm repeating what I say already there. I feel a disconnection with myself, or let's say something that I do not wish for. So I like to keep that search going, and for me, it's really the thing is a journey, no? And what is also, when you do more projects, it becomes a body of work automatically, you know, and it's being put in dialogue. So that is, you know, it creates a certain weight and a critical weight that you are always confronted with. So you need to not only answer, of course, the question of a client, but you have to answer also towards that body of work, which is, I think, one also of the big driver forces to think of something. And the other question, what did you ask me? Sorry, I lost. I think I forgot. What was the second question?
It was about the site and how do you respond to it through, like I was talking about one of the project which was the NGO project which you did.
Yeah.
And the boundary
the
wall.
wall. Yes. So I think I see all my work as being site specific in a way, because for me sites, as if I had explained, a site is also where we source our materials from. You know, a site is a place of production. Site is not only on which we build the building or what we have as a view. A site is a lot more things than that. So site is for me always very present in the building. And in this case, this boundary wall that's a very banal answer. Is that that's the plot boundary. So there will be a building next to it. So we cannot do anything there. And at the moment, Christian Keretz, the Swiss architect, is building there a big parking that now connects to that building. So the boundary wall disappears a bit in the plot. So, and we have this long facade because I propose to only build half of the plot. So the other half stays empty, and therefore we have a very long facade that we could make. Otherwise, we just had the ends, you know, the front and the back end as a facade possibility. So that's why it got this very present facade, as you saw in the project.
Thank you.
Thanks. If there are any more questions and somebody would like to come in, please go ahead if you and raise your hand if you want. We have a few minutes, so if you have your questions ready, please.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, I I had something to ask.
Yeah, yeah.
So, while I mean, there's a constant relationship between site, gesture, and the materiality. I wanted to ask you is there might be sometimes, when you feel a certain gesture to explore, like the relationship between the gesture and the material first, and then you arrive at a site, or before you realize that this is the site, and but you want to explore a specific gesture in it which you were thinking about it. So were there times when you started the process with the gesture and not the site?
Yes, yes, yes. So let's say this I mean, the gesture of drawing is already. I mean, one was tracing of a site, but the others were just drawing, just cyclists. No, so the gesture of forming is definitely one. We do a lot of material development in things that do not at all directly from come from um, um, a site, but the project in a whole, the building project is in a whole always I try to build up its specific relationship with the site, so but because for me it's really important to make architecture that is bound to place, and not footloose. In that sense, I really don't believe in a generic architecture that could be just built everywhere. I would find that such a missed opportunity if that would not be present. So for me, it's something I would not question. We cannot look at the thing as a thing on its own, as an object on its own that doesn't have a relationship. We need to think of its place, and that is not something that should be left only to an urban planner, for us to decide what we need to think of place. That is for us as architects very important to define. Yeah. So and I relate it directly also to its construction or the way how things are formed, because that builds up this specific relationship with it. But that is just a method, of course. There's many more methods how we can relate to place. Yeah.
I mean, yes. I mean, I wasn't talking about not considering the context or the site. I was talking about the process while it goes. Like, for example, in all the projects, I mean, most of the projects that you showed, that you've shown today, started with the site, then the materiality came in, and then gesture came in, or the site and then gesture came in, or materiality came in. I mean, but there are sometimes, your agency as an architect, and you want to explore something, a particular gesture, and then you start the process with the gesture. I mean, this process is always to and fro. I mean, that I understand. That you first start with the gesture, then go to a site, and then again you come to the gesture and then change it. But I mean, there might be some time when, yeah, you're like, okay, in this context, I want to explore this gesture, and then you enter into the site through that gesture.
But I think you simplify the process in that understanding. It's like if you say, I first look, and then I'm gonna listen, and then I'm gonna smell, and then I'm gonna taste. I think you do these things in simultaneous processes, to understand something. So site matter and gesture is not I do first this and then that and then that. They are all the senses that I have available to work at the same time with. So I'm and listening and looking to to perceive its possibilities. No, so that's it's good that you ask it, because it doesn't work like that. We cannot, and of course maybe one can feel slightly more dominant than the other at a certain moment, but I think we are all, the moment we can say we are only looking, but the moment something changes in the sounds that we hear, it's activated, so that's just how it works. Yeah.
Okay,
Can we do
thanks.
one last question? Then I have to stop, because I have
Yeah.
here's the weekend, so I have something.
Yeah, sure.
with the
No,
family.
there's only one question which is in the question box. It says, could I ask the question? It's from Sanjay Matre. He asks, could I ask the question? Bucky Fuller asked Norman Foster, how much does your building weigh, Mr. Anne Holtrop?
Yes. I don't know. Heavy. All my things are heavy. Very heavy.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite of Buckminster Fuller, who was very efficient in its material usage. Of course, that was the main. Let's say that was the important agenda in the work, and I understand that he asked Norman Foster this question, because Norman Foster maybe could also be understood as an architect of efficiency,
Yeah.
And but in my case it is very, the things are the things have a lot of presence also because of its weight, and that I think I find, for me, this idea of this material reservoir, also that we live on top of this reservoir of material, that this material has such a power just by its presence, and that is weight, also, and I find that very beautiful. So I want to, bring in that weight, and therefore that sense of gravity, and therefore that sense of, intensity that it brings, and that is that for me is very, very important. So that's so the weight question for me is maybe it's almost the other way around. That sometimes if it get more heavy, it gotten a bit better.
But defined by its mass. No?
I was thinking of Michael Heitzer. If you would ask Michael Heitzer, can you make a lighter work? He would look at you. What is this question? About. He had all these mass works that he did in the beginning, where he had direct mass, where he would just pull a very heavy stone by a tractor through the ground, and that was, it was a performance of weight there.
So I mean, that's a nice way to kind of see it, performance of weight, or maybe the gesture of weight. That sense, So thanks, thanks, Anne. It was great having a conversation with you, and I look forward to more conversations like this with you, whenever they happen in the future. And when you come to India next time, please do visit our school. It'd be great.
I will. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.